hundreds of thousands of people that are invading.
Border security takes center stage. The president's push to close the southern border.
Murdering babies when they're born alive is legal in many states.
House Republicans move on the Born Alive Protection Act. How they plan to outmaneuver Democrats on Capitol Hill with a vote on the pro-life measure. And 3 months after the president signed the landmark criminal justice reform bill, the impact of the First Step Act. This and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The U.S. cutting off aid to 3 Central American countries as the president threatens to close entryways. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The White House says there is a crisis happening at the border. President Trump tweeting today, Homeland Security is being nice, but, quote, not for long.
Critics say the president's threats to close the border go too far. National security correspondent Eric Phillips joins us with a closer look. Eric?
Absolutely, where the president is saying that he has to take these drastic measures because Mexico is not doing enough to hold up their end of the deal.
Mexico has to stop it. They have people coming right through Mexico.
In addition to the threat of closing the border, the State Department followed through on stopping certain aid to Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador.
We were paying them tremendous amounts of money, and we're not paying them anymore because they haven't done a thing for us.
The goal of that money was to reduce the flow of immigrants by improving conditions in those countries. But the president said that's not happening, a charge he leveled in October to CBN News.
But when you see a caravan that's pouring up to our country with thousands of people, maybe 10,000 people now, look, we're not going to let them come into our country.
CBN contributor Chuck Holton demonstrates just how easy it is to cross the border as things stand right now.
I'm currently in northern Mexico, right on the U.S. southern border, and I'm going to cross into the United States right now. And I want to show you just how quickly I can do this. Just how quick can I get over the border. Here I am, and I'm in the United States, just like that.
Critics say cutting off aid will only encourage more migration and people will still find their way in. They add closing the border will ultimately cost the U.S. almost $2 billion in goods that go back and forth across the border every day. Plus, they call it a broad brush that won't mainly target criminals.
Some of them are criminals, some of them are dangerous people, but most of them probably are not. And it's a drastic step to just make no distinction between them and just put up a figurative wall along the border.
Trump's acting chief of staff defended the measures.
Our hands are forced on that decision because Democrats won't help us fix the problem. Faced with those limitations, the president will do everything he can. If closing the ports of entry mean that, that's exactly what he intends to do.
President Trump has said the so-called catch and release practice of allowing illegal immigrants to stay in the U.S. until their court date simply doesn't work. While the president said it's not a viable solution, Border Patrol officials may have no other choice because of overcrowded conditions. John and Jenna.
Phillips, thank you very much. We'll hear now from more our ABC News political director Rick Klein and CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. Rick, to you first. You know, we see the president wanting to shut down the border. Mexico, of course, is our third largest trading partner, and then there's all of these migrants coming to the border, creating a lot of problems down there. Is this about solving the immigration crisis, or is it really more, in your opinion, about 2020 and fulfilling campaign promises?
We'll see if he follows through. He's threatened this before. You know, I talked to the Senate Homeland Security chairman, who's an ally of the president, Senator Ron Johnson. He says it's not actually practical to close the border entirely. So some of this is rhetoric. Maybe it's about trying to get the Mexican government to a negotiating table. I think a lot of it is colored by the fact that this president made this commitment regarding the border. He has obviously been very fixated on getting his border wall, and I think part of it is associated with that.
And, you know, if I can just add in, some of his critics will say he's crazy enough to do it. I mean, and there's that, you know, that Trump wild card. You know, that's exactly where he wants his enemies and, quite frankly, everybody to be. This idea that, you know, he may just do it, and that gives him leverage to a degree. Also, he looks at everything in terms of money. You know, and I understand there's a bigger picture here in terms of you dry up the money in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, you risk, you know, these communities becoming less stable. But he just says, you know, what are we getting for it, right? I mean, same thing with G20, same thing with Iran deal. I mean, every trade, China, everything is about fairness. We're not going to take it, America first, all that. But money seems to be the common denominator a lot of times.
Jenna just hinted towards 2020. Joe Biden is in some political hot water over his affectionate, what some might call inappropriate style. You've already seen some Democrats begin to circle the wagons around him. Do you think that this will, for both of you, keep him from running?
No, I don't think so. Though I'd be curious to get your opinion, Rick. I guess we'll get to that in a moment. No, I don't think so. I feel like he's stuck in 1979. You know, I just feel like, you know, this type of conduct. Look, I'm not saying anything about the conduct. I'm not condoning it or saying anything about it. But in 1979, this conduct compared to today, there is a different barometer. There's a different bar today. And that poses a problem for the Democrats. I mean, you're going to come out and be part of, you're going to lead the Me Too movement, the hashtag Me Too movement, and then you have this. Well, where does that make Joe Biden fit in all of this? I mean, I think that's a real problem for Democrats. And I will just say about evangelicals, sorry, you can't say anything right now. I mean, if you're going to support Donald Trump, there's nothing you can say about Joe Biden when it comes to character issues.
I think for him, the rules have changed. I think David's right. He is, even since he left politics just 3 years ago, they've changed. And certainly since he first entered the Senate in, 1974, things are just different now. And all of it gets looked at differently. And I think if he is going to run, he has to appreciate that all of this is on the table. And his handling of the Anita Hill hearings, we're talking about his handling of the busing issue in the mid-1970s, his flip-flops or his changing positions on abortion rights. All of these things are fair game for Democrats to look at. And the party is so different than the party that he came up in. And part of that's his appeal. There are a lot of Democrats that would like to go back to the good old Joe Biden days where they felt like they were a working class appeal that Democrats like Biden could appeal to. But the party is so different right now. And this is going to be a rough moment for his pre-campaign. His people around him have said that they've always expected that things could come out and that wouldn't affect his decision making. But man, it's hard to imagine that you don't look at all of the events of the last few days and wonder if that gives him pause.
David, I want to circle back to you because you had mentioned what evangelicals, their critique of this. But White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway criticized Biden, calling him crazy or creepy Uncle Joe. Given her boss's checkered past, does that kind of create an awkward situation?
Yeah, it does, for sure. And, you know, I just think this is one of those things the White House has to leave alone. But, yeah, good luck, Donald Trump, leaving this alone. He's not going to do that. Matter of fact, you know, because remember, the White House official position, or at least Trump's official position, is I didn't do anything wrong. I mean, he hasn't admitted to anything. So, look, if he can figure out, Trump, if he can figure out a way to win at whatever game he's playing, and a lot of it's three-dimensional chess, and some would call it Parcheesi, but whatever he's playing, he'll figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, Rick, on health care in 2020, President Trump, he wants to do with Obamacare. A lot of Republicans, people in his own party, are saying this has not been a winning issue for us in the past. Why are we revisiting it now? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the most telling response to me was Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. He says, I look forward to seeing what Donald Trump and Speaker Pelosi come up with, which means it's not my problem, guys. I am not dealing with that. I've dealt with it already. I think as we learn more about what drove this push in the lawsuit that was filed just last week, you recognize the president continues to think this is a winning issue, and there's very few around him that think the same. The Democrats essentially won control of the House on this issue. They were obsessed with pushing this as hard as they could. Republicans had to play defense throughout the campaign, and the bottom line is if Obamacare was ruled unconstitutional, thrown out tomorrow, there is no plan to replace it, and millions of Americans would probably suffer pretty dire consequences.
David, back to the Mueller report. We wanted to talk about that. It fell flat for a lot of these Democrats, but they're not letting it die. What do you think their end game is here? What are they trying to get at?
Well, you know, I've been kind of on record, if you will, from an analysis standpoint. But when are you going to stop digging the grave? I mean, look, the top line of Mueller is no collusion. I mean, so you can go to the underlying evidence, and these are the words we hear, underlying evidence, underlying evidence, underlying evidence. And I get it. They're trying to create their own special counsel. They're trying to find any nook and cranny they can possibly find to create that narrative and keep the cloud going. But at some point, you've got to just say, look, it is what it is. And this whole idea that Gerald Nadler is going to now subpoena or he wants the unredacted report, I mean, now you're talking about national security issues. And I understand it's going to be a legal fight and it's never going to be unredacted. But the fact that they would even want that, I think, is a bit problematic.
This is a bit of a political gamble for Democrats, is it not?
Yeah, I think they were dug pretty far in on this. But David's right. The top line is no collusion. It's hard to imagine someone else is going to find collusion if Mueller didn't. The question of obstruction is a legal one that I think will come out through the final say. I think we're going to know most of what Mueller found, and most of the report is going to come out in some form or fashion, and then Democrats have to decide whether that's enough or not. There's going to be people pushing him in either direction.
Well, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it right there. ABC's Rick Klein and CBN's David Brody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Well, April is Second Chance Month, and the White House is celebrating by focusing on the impact of prison reform. Amber Strong shows us the effects so far of the First Step Act.
In the 3 months since the First Step Act became law, more than 500 inmates have been released from prison. The White House is celebrating by honoring those second chances. We spoke to a former inmate who's celebrating herself.
All I can do is thank God, because I'm not going to say prison's bad. I'm going to say I learned a lot in my 10 years. I got closer to God. I got to know who he was and what he could do. It's unexplainable to see the president and then all the people who put their hard-earned work into this came together just to pass this bill. It's the best blessing.
Part of today's activities includes discussions on employing those re-entering the workforce. The White House and advocates agree there's work to be done.
The act needs to be fully funded in order to fulfill its promise to the people inside, as well as to the people who have been released. There are also provisions of the act that have not yet been implemented. Good time credits is a big part of that. That was a provision that we had anticipated going into effect immediately, and it's something that we're still working on having implemented to its full effect. The second step, I think, really looks at not just what's happening on the inside, but also what we do for people when they come back into these communities. In order for people to really have a second chance, we need to be honest and genuine about that. So we need to look at housing. We need to look at employment.
Now expect criminal justice overhaul to be a big talking point in the 2020 election. Many of the candidates are already on the record talking about what needs to be done and pointing out their ability to work across the aisle when it came to this measure. And of course, the White House is already looking toward the future. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
Thanks, Amber. Well, as soon as tomorrow, Republicans will try to force a vote on the House floor on the Born Alive Protection Act. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson is here with more on the details of the push engineered by Minority Whip Steve Scalise. Abigail, can you explain why he says this legislation is so important and what it would do?
Yes, John. Well, what it would do is what it says in the title. It's the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and it will give abortion survivors legal protections. It says that doctors and medical professionals performing abortions have to get these babies who survive the abortion procedures the necessary and life-saving treatment, or they could face criminal penalties. And when I spoke with Congressman Scalise, he told me when his staff first brought this issue before him, he was shocked to learn that it was not already a law. Take a look at what he said.
What we're trying to do is put legal protection in place that most people are shocked to find out doesn't already exist in law. You find that so many Democrats are afraid to buck Nancy Pelosi. But again, on this issue, I don't understand how you can allow a baby to be born alive and then let it be murdered and think that that should be legal anywhere. So this is an issue that even most people who identify themselves as being pro-choice think it's wrong to kill the baby after it's born alive. So this shouldn't be even part of the abortion debate. This should be a protection that's guaranteed everybody in America.
And Republican lawmakers are saying that the Democrats who refuse to support this, they're accusing them of supporting infanticide.
Abby, so for those of us who aren't familiar with Congress, can you explain why Republicans have to try to force this vote?
Well, so with Democrat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in control, she determines what bills come to the House floor, and she does not want to bring this bill to the floor. So Republicans say they argue that 70% of all voters support this issue, and so they want to force this on the House floor, force a vote on this, and let voters see where their lawmakers stand on this issue. So what they're doing is they're filing what's called a discharge petition, which if they can get 218 signatures, they can force this vote on the floor, but that's going to be hard to come by in a Democrat-controlled House.
Yeah, Abigail, you kind of touched on that. It doesn't sound like it has a really high chance of passing.
So if every Republican signs it, that gives them 197 signatures. They have 3 pro-life Democrat signatures already, but they're still short 18. And finding those 18 Democrats who are willing to go against their leadership is going to be very tricky. But this petition will not expire until the next Congress, so they have almost 2 years, but it's still going to be a very tough task to get those 218 signatures.
All right. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson, thanks so much for that report.
Thank you.
Coming up, how a lack of foreign worker visas is hurting workers across America. A shortage of temporary visas is putting a squeeze on some foreign workers across the country.
Upwards of 100,000 landscapers applied for only 33,000 visas this season alone. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us now to break down the impact that will have. Ben?
Well, John and Jenna, you can imagine the lack of visas is having a pretty big impact. I spoke with one landscaping company in Maryland where the H-2B workers make up nearly 75% of their workforce, and this year they didn't get a single one. In 1991, Jesse Baines started a landscaping company with the help of his family.
My boys have been helping me since they were little tiny.
It's grown into a successful business.
It was really small. We started at our home with a little shop out back, and now we come to work. I'm very proud of him.
Jesse didn't let a diagnosis of FSH muscular dystrophy at age 14 stop him.
When I first met him, he had a truck full of firewood, and he was just a guy with a lot of sheer determination.
A determination landing Quality One 6-figure projects. That means more jobs and more workers.
We did go through a recruitment period where we had, I think we had 9 applicants. We had 1 show up for an interview.
So you're trying to hire American.
We are.
So the Baines had to look elsewhere.
And I was uneducated. I didn't know a whole lot about, the foreign worker program. And I thought, like many Americans think today, guys are taking jobs. They're taking American jobs. No way.
Turns out the H-2B program is not like that. It's designed to let employers hire temporary foreign workers for non-agriculture jobs. Companies must also show attempts to hire American workers before applying. Created back in the 50s, H-2B is not an easy process. Employers must first submit applications, pay fees, then wait to be chosen through a lottery.
It's extensive. But anyway, we did that. And once we got our first workers, it was like heaven. It was heaven. They were at work every day. You could rely on them. They were eager to work.
Lately, getting help through it has proven difficult.
It's my understanding that that this fiscal year there were 33,000 available visas and upwards of 100,000 applicants just on that first day.
The Baines applied in December and then again this year for 15 workers, but did not get a single one.
We have no H-2B workers this year.
What does that mean for your business?
Realistically, we try to hire U.S., try to hire locally. Most of them will be unskilled or unreliable if we're able to find them.
This forced them to turn down business and leave new equipment sitting in the parking lot with no one to operate them.
We banked on them coming here because we're going to bring in more work and break off and expand into more trucks.
The H-2B visa cap of 66,000 workers a year was set more than 20 years ago. Congress just passed a bill allowing nearly 70,000 more visas to open up, but DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen limited that to only an additional 15,000.
I felt like God said, stop praying small, look up. And I realized that he began to expand my borders. And then my heart was for, not just for our workers, it was for every business that was in this crisis to get their workers. And then I saw that there was that opportunity that legislators, that Secretary Nielsen, she has the ability to release additional visas and kind of alleviate this.
Nielsen says Congress, not DHS, should be responsible for determining whether the annual numerical limitations for H-2B workers set by Congress needs to be modified, and by how much, and for setting parameters to ensure that enough workers are available to meet employers' temporary needs throughout the year. So while lawmakers debate what to do, companies like Quality One have this message for their customers.
I would tell my customers, no matter what happens, we're going to try our best. And one way or another, we will service our contracts. It might get messy for a little while, but it will get better, and we won't abandon them. We will get it done.
At this point, no decision has been made on Capitol Hill to change the visa cap. In the meantime, the Bains continue to turn down work. Just last month, they said no to a $100,000 job because John and Jenna, they don't have the workers.
Ben, it's obviously not an easy process. How much does it cost to bring H-2B workers here?
Well, in this case, it cost the Bain family around $25,000 a year to bring 15 H-2B workers to Maryland. Even though they did not get any workers the past 2 times, they actually still had to pay the application fee, so they are out that money. But again, companies like the Bains want to go the legal route, and again, it does cost money to make that happen.
CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy. Thanks, Ben. A rare archaeological discovery sheds light on ancient biblical history. That story when we come back. Welcome back. Israeli archaeologists have made 2 rare discoveries in and around the ancient city of David.
That's right. They point to historical figures mentioned in the Bible. Chris Mitchell shows us what makes these new finds so special.
The discoveries came from here, the Givati excavation. It's part of the ancient city of David, where King David set up his capital 3,000 years ago. Israeli archaeologists made the discoveries in this structure, where they found evidence of a big fire they believe dates back to 586 BC, when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. Here you can still see the ash from the fire. The discoveries are an ancient bulla and a seal.
This is the bulla. A bulla is actually a tiny piece of clay that was attached to letters or jars in order to make sure that no one opened them without noticing.
The bulla bore a special name.
And this one says, to Natan Melech, the servant of the king. LeNatan Melech, Eved HaMelech. Now, the name Natan Melech is known from the Bible, from the book of Kings.
While archaeologists can't say for certain this Natan Melech is the one mentioned in the Bible, Dr. Gerbevich from Hebrew University says the evidence is compelling.
First, the name Natan Melech, which is rare. Second, the period. We're talking about the mid-7th century BCE, King Josiah. And third, the fact that we have the title. So Natan Melech was someone who was close to the king.
For the archaeologists, the finds are like touching Jerusalem's history.
This is very impressive for me, not only because of the history, because this is actually a snapshot for the history that happened here 2,600 years ago.
These discoveries shed more light on ancient Jerusalem and paint a more complete picture of King David's city. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Givati excavation, the city of David.
Chris always does great reporting. Well, finally tonight, it officially marks the peak bloom for those famous Japanese cherry blossoms here in Washington.
And we leave you with these images by CBN photojournalist Patrick Robertson.